One of our subscribers emailed me a question that I thought was worth answering. His name is Hong Tan, and he thanked me for one of our recent videos that he loaded up on a lot of spam. Hong, I hope you're eating more than spam these days, but in any case, the question was, he said that Tyson's CEO said that they were having a hard time keeping up with inflation, and was wondering if the government at any point in time would implement pricing controls to try and keep the pricing of food down. I'm going to do a two-part answer here because both of them are good questions. So Tyson CEO said costs are hitting us faster than we can get pricing up at this point. He also said we've seen accelerating and unprecedented inflation. So I wanted to just quickly review with you guys a little bit of information on Tyson. Tyson said that they saw 14% inflation in the third quarter, 9% year to date. They've hiked pork prices 39% so far, beef prices 12%, poultry 16%, and they're planning more price increases. Tyson's third quarter profit, which is when all this inflation was incurring, was up 42% year over year to $2.70 per share, beating the estimate by over $1 per share. Their revenue was up 25% to $12.48 billion, beating the estimate by $1 billion. Volume of sales rose 10%, and what's interesting, this is interesting, $1 billion, I mentioned that they had beat revenue forecast by $1 billion. More than $1 billion is due to consumer price increases, 300 million of that alone in the third quarter. So when you look at the year over year, in one quarter, they reached about a third of that increase. Their estimated sales are now 46 to 47 billion. They were around 44 billion. So this is an interesting scenario where you see these food prices at the consumer level increasing dramatically. But I want to run a comparison for you. I'm going to compare this real quick to the prices of fed cattle, because what I was just looking at are consumer prices, what you're paying at the grocery store. Fed cattle is what the farmer's getting for their cows. So the future contracts August 2011 were around 132.22. August this year, they're around 165.77, and that was after a substantial increase in July. So going off of the June numbers that showed a 44.16% increase in consumer pricing, doesn't even count July, which is we all felt July, it went up even more. That equates to a 25% increase. If you just wanted to look at January 2020 to June 2021 and take that same comparison, January 2020 to June 2021, when we look at consumer prices, they've gone up 12.69%. When we look at fed cattle prices, they've gone up 6%. So when Tyson's talking about staying ahead of inflation and costs, I think it's rather interesting that they have managed to beat the inflation of the costs of their hogs and beef by about 100%. So they're staying ahead of inflation by about 100%. I would not at all worry about Tyson or Cargill or any of these companies when it comes to inflation. They seem to have a knack for outbeating it. And meanwhile, farmers who are only realizing half of that percentage increase are also incurring an increase in inputs. So what you're actually seeing right now in the market, and this has been a big deal for a long period of time, is for whatever reason, as these consumer prices go through the roof and profits are going through the roof, I mean, a 40-something% increase in profits, the farmers still aren't getting very much for their cattle. They're only seeing about half of that increase over the same periods of time. And yet their input costs continue to go up with inflation because their inputs are based on consumer pricing. And so what's going to end up happening is if this scenario keeps playing out, over time what you're going to end up seeing are farmers going out of business. So there's been a lot of antitrust lawsuits and things filed over the years, and a lot of those costs get passed down onto the consumer. The Vilsack is quote unquote taking a different approach this time. We know that the last time he investigated an antitrust lawsuit with the big packaging companies, nothing happened. So this time he's taking a different tactic. The Biden administration is investing $500 million into small and medium-sized meat packaging facilities. Here's the thing about this, is it's not actually doing anything to diversify the market. In fact, it's making a very, very small impact. Right now we have farmers all over the place, small farmers who can't get their animals processed. We're in a complete backup again. You can't go anywhere and have an animal processed. You can't even get on the waiting list. A lot of these small, medium-sized facilities, we're also picking up work from larger USDA facilities, which are meeting the needs of larger corporations. Some of the ones here locally have posted on their websites lately that they've stopped doing that. They're just taking orders, but still when you call them up, they're still booked out. And so when you look at these small farmers and their ability to compete in the marketplace, that's one of the big challenges, is being able to take your beef and have it processed and have a product to sell. Otherwise, we don't have the option of buying from them. So Tom Vilsack is investing this $500 million into meat packaging facilities. There are two examples of packaging facilities being built right now in the Midwest. One is a smaller facility and one is kind of a mid-sized facility. The mid-sized facility can handle about 40 head of cattle a week and 80 head of hogs per week. The smaller one can just do about 50 head of cattle per week. They're not processing hogs, etc. So the smaller one is costing $3 million to build. The larger mid-sized one is costing about $8 million to build. So when you take those numbers, those figures, and let's just kind of average that out. So we say $5 million per facility that produces 50 head of cattle and per week. And we figure that into $500 million. What we're actually doing is we're increasing the production of about 5,000 cattle per week, or about 1,000 cattle per day across the nation for small farmers. This is a big country, and that number sounds pretty big, but it's actually very small. In fact, it's minimal in comparison to the competition that this bill is supposed to help diversify from. So when you look at Tyson processes about 30,000 head of cattle per day. Cargill, which is actually a larger cattle producer than Tyson, Cargill processes 6,000 head of cattle out of one processing plant. So we're not even touching what one processing, we're doing 1/6 across the country for small and mid-sized processing plants that one Cargill facility is doing. That doesn't do anything to diversify the market. These are pennies. This brings me back to, when we look at the trillions of dollars, I did a video the other day talking about food stamps. And there were people on there that said, well, we're entitled to this. Entitled to what? You're not entitled to anything. Entitlement is a belief. It is not an actual guarantee. There are no guarantees. You could get on the Titanic, but it doesn't guarantee or entitle you to get off of the Titanic. You can invest in any number of stocks or businesses, but it doesn't guarantee you that you're ever going to get a return. And taxation certainly does not come with any type of entitlement. And so you can think that you're entitled to these programs because you're investing in your government, but the investment in the government is a big black hole. And so it is no different than investing in a bad corporation. I mean, you have to look at these things and put them into perspective. There is no such thing in life or nature as entitlement. And that's a silly thought process that I think we need to get out of our heads. But when you do look at these numbers, when you look at, hush it, Zeus, when you look at the number of dollars going into the economy, trillions upon trillions of dollars, you're seeing 500 million getting thrown in the direction of small meat producers. You're seeing 79 billion being thrown, or 49 billion, whatever it was, being thrown into food, to the SNAP program. That doesn't even compare to the trillions of dollars going into the markets. These trillions of dollars are going right into the hands of corporations. They're supposed to produce jobs. But if you're a large corporation and suddenly you're getting trillions of dollars versus a tax cut, well, that's money right into your pocket. You don't have to do anything. At least with a tax cut, in order for you to produce more money, you have to go out and be productive. In this scenario, you don't have to be productive. You're getting the money. You don't have to hire more people. You can do it through technology and other ways. The amount of spending that we've seen is not benefiting the lower classes at all. You're getting a very disproportionate amount of those funds. And I'm not saying to ask for more, please don't. We have put so much money out there, I think that it is beyond repair, to be honest with you. I think it's way too late to even think about anything else, which is what's going to bring me to the second part of the question here, which was, will food pricing become fixed by the government? Will the government step in and fix food pricing? I have a couple scenarios for you. The first one is the Biden hold my beer scenario. And that's when you think nothing else can get as bad as it already has. And you go in and you do something like put pricing controls on food. I think this would be the biggest mess up you possibly could. Just when you thought you got everything as bad as it could possibly get, you go in and you fix the food prices. One of the reasons why I said that the SNAP program was bad, one of the problems that I see with overinflation is that we are eliminating the rationing system that has been put in place by the currency. And you all know I'm not a big fan of currency to begin with, but the fact of the matter is you're eliminating that rationing system. A clear example of what happens when you try and fix food prices in an inflationary environment is Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe recently did this, and it turned into an utter disaster because Zimbabwe, in fixing their prices, they did the same thing we're doing now. They pumped a bunch of money into the economy. Things got out of hand. Things got out of control. And they ran in and fixed food prices because they were trying to stop things from falling apart. And by fixing the food prices, two things happened. Number one, the costs of inputs into creating the food products continued to climb to the point where farmers were actually creating food at a deficit. So what do you think they did? They stopped farming. There's no point in operating a business if there's no profit involved. I know that there are a lot of people out there that think that capitalism is bad, but it is a form of productivity that has proven over and over again to take even the poorest of people and put them in a better situation. There has not been any other system out there. But when we talk about capitalism, there's two different forms. There's a capitalism structure that's much more like corporate fascism. That's not true capitalism. And then there's the free market capitalist, which is the ability to trade and exchange goods and services at your own free will, and you can negotiate a price. And the market dictates what those things are worth. So they had runaway inflation, they capped food prices, bankrupt farmers, and they ran out of food. So everything that they were trying to prevent from happening happened anyway because they ran out of food. Everybody could go to the store and buy food as food became extremely cheap under that scenario. And so they just simply ran out. Farmers stopped producing, food became too cheap, they ran out. There was no rationing involved. So that was an utter disaster. I call that the hold my beer scenario. Now there's another scenario that I think that you could look at, and I think that this is something that is a very real scenario. I think it's going to come in the form of more or less a suggestion to grocery stores and other things, just like during the pandemic, we saw these things, kind of controls being put in place. They weren't coming from the government, but they were suggested by the government with toilet paper and things like that. But you will start to see, hey, you can only buy so much of X, Y, and Z. That is what I'm going to call the return to basement scenario. And I think that if that were to happen, you would actually see rioting in the streets by the masses. I don't know the answer to this question. Most people who can rationalize and think these things through would say that both of those scenarios are very bad, but I have no idea what this administration is going to do. In the Weimar Republic of Germany, similar things kind of happened. And like I said, I think the damage is already done. You can't reverse the trillions that have been put into the market. Raising interest rates won't even reverse it. I mean, this is a very, very daunting scenario. Stagflation, which is when inflation continues to go higher, your purchasing power still remains low because you can't keep up with the inflation. It's also known as runaway inflation. when that happens, there's not a whole lot that you can do about it other than riding out the crash. And I think that's where this is all headed. I mean, it's going to head for a crash at some point. There is no control mechanism that you can really put into place to reverse trillions. I mean, what equates to almost $15 trillion over the course of a couple of years. This isn't something that just started with Biden. It got way out of control with Biden, but it started with the pandemic. I take that back. It didn't start with the pandemic because it started before the pandemic. I actually posted a video in December 2019 highlighting this scenario playing out. And that was just with the credit default swap markets. I think the pandemic kind of added to it. All of these events that have followed have added to it. It's moved a lot faster than even what I thought. Where we are a couple years later is where I thought we'd be in about 5 years in a grand scale of a 10-year period. So this is happening much faster than I think a lot of people anticipated. And that's what has so many people on Wall Street surprised right now. A lot of people don't know what to do because it's just gotten out of hand. It's gotten out of control. And now you're actually seeing reports being handed out to the Fed explaining why inflation is going to be better for jobs in the long run. I mean, this is a policy change. It's a wrong one. It has failed in every country where they have tried it. It has turned into utter disaster. But like I said, at this point, I guess if you're a governing body and you've done this, you just try and focus on, well, trying to turn it into a positive somehow because you can't reverse it. But in the Weimar Republic, farmers actually became some of the most profitable people. Their inputs were lower. It didn't take quite as much fertilizer as it does today to grow something, but they were able to produce goods and sell them, and because they were necessary, people were buying them. I mean, people were bringing wheelbarrow loads of cash for a loaf of bread. So ultimately, what I see happening from this point going forward is a big reset. Imagine that, right? A great reset of sorts. What you can do, what we can all do, is kind of focus on, what plays out in these types of scenarios and try and control the narrative. If you're going to continue to run to the grocery store and panic buy, you're losing control of the narrative. If you start to focus on trying to acquire as many of your goods and the things that you need, like food, locally, what you're doing is you're pushing that reset back to a market that is controlled and operated by the populace, the people, versus the large corporations. And I think that's what a lot of people are fearful of with the Great Reset. Ultimately, economies crashing and rebuilding is actually a good thing. It's healthy for the economy. But when you don't have control of the rebuilding, then that's where it turns into a bad thing. So the way that you control that within your local communities is start using the dollars that do come your way to support your local farmers, your local communities, those who are supporting you with local goods and services. Are you going to continue to ask these companies that are beating their inflation prices by 100% to feed you and to feed you fairly? Or are you going to take matters into your own hands? Are you going to start growing your own food? Are you going to learn to be self-sufficient? Are you going to learn to support members of your community and by buying the products and services that they're able to provide instead of buying them from large corporations? And it's nothing, like I said, it's nothing against large corporations. It's an economic perspective of how we need to be able to treat ourselves and our community to get through these tough periods of time. There's always going to be a need for big ag, for the general populace. It's going to be difficult for small farmers to cover everything that they are able to provide. But if we want to have a future that is somewhat within our control, the best way to do it is by supporting our local producers. So, Hong, I'm not sure if I answered all of your questions the way you wanted me to, but I do think that the hold my beer scenario and the return to the basement scenario are very bad ones. And I hope that nobody ever thinks the best way to get the market to correct is to let the market correct itself. We've already pumped the money out there. The damage is already done. It's not something that could be easily reversed. We have to let that market correct itself. Each of you can play a role in that correction and shaping its future, but it's up to you to make the decisions on where you buy your goods and services from. I mean, the choice is really up to you guys. It is up to you guys on who you're going to support, how you're going to support them, and how you're going to improve upon your abilities to barter and trade as these things progress. But there is absolutely no way that you can reverse what has already been done. And it's starting to come full circle to people. My inflation video from over a year ago isn't sounding so crazy anymore. These things are actually happening. Lumber prices have actually gone up 300%. Fuel prices have actually gone up 200%. Food prices are on their way to that 400% that I said they would be in a few years. All of this is actually happening, and there is no way that we can reverse it. We've already printed it. We've already thrown it out there. You can't just hike interest rates one day and expect things to come to a screaming halt that won't do anything at this point in time. There's no way to pull the money back out of the market that we've put in without causing even more damage, more severe damage. The best thing that's going to happen here is that we eventually learn to let the market ride itself out, to let the market choose. And when the market has the right to choose, when you have the right to choose the outcome, that's when we're going to get the best outcome. When the people have the right to choose who they buy from, who they're supporting, and see those companies and businesses thrive, that's the right outcome. I say all that, and I definitely don't think that the efforts to solve the current economy are over with, and I certainly don't think that efforts to create some sort of great reset are all over. And in fact, that competition is just getting fueled every moment that goes by that there's a bad policy. Prepare yourself, but learn to be self-sufficient. Learn to grow some food. Learn to start being productive in ways that aren't dependent on somebody else, that aren't dependent on a government resource. And remember that you are entitled to nothing that you do not earn yourself. That's the most important thing. I don't know where we ever got entitlement from, that word. We aren't entitled to anything but the right to achieve. So get out there and start achieving. But that requires that requires being productive.